Okay, the four-color theorem basically states, for those that don't know, that any map in a plane can be colored using only four colors, such that any two regions that share a boundary don't share the same color. Sounds simple enough, put forward back in the mid-19th century, wasn't proven until the late 21st century, and when it was proven, it used computers to brute force the answer, essentially going through every possible map combination and saying, no, we can't find one that requires five colors. This is fine, it still counts as a proof in mathematics, but it's impossible for a human to sit down and look at a string of computer code and go, yes, now I see that the theorem is true. So the search for a computer-free proof continues. With that in mind, I'd like to run you by a computer-free proof. You might ask, if I'm sitting on this, why haven't I written it up and sent it off? I have started to, but the people that I've been talking about this with and running it by, there's a theorem statement in the middle which needs work. It is messy, it is not clear, I don't know how to fix it, the people that I've spoken to don't know necessarily how to fix it. That's not to say that it's wrong, but the wording needs help. And so I'm putting it out there to the internet. If anyone has any ideas, please let me know. I have been sitting on this idea for the better part of a decade now, and I haven't found a hole in the logic. That doesn't mean there isn't one. If you find a hole in the logic, please do let me know. I would love to hear it. Okay, so since this is the internet and not a maths journal, I'm not going to assume that everyone knows where I'm starting from, so I'm going to run through some of the history of the problem to bring everyone up to speed so that everyone can follow along. Okay, so to begin, the first thing that was realized very, very early on after this theorem was proposed, that if you've got a vertex with four or more regions intersecting at a vertex of degree 4 or more, that you can make this into a cubic graph and it will, so let's say we've got 4 here, we can instead call that 2 3s, and if we color, say, this one red, this one green, this one blue, and this one blue as well, then that will translate over to this one here. So this one's blue, this one's red, this one's green. And it's okay. If you can four-color the cubic map, you can four-color the map with vertices of degree 4 or more. I will attempt to write larger for future examples. First time using a whiteboard. Okay, so the first major breakthrough towards the four-color proof came from Kemp. Now Kemp reasoned as follows. If you start with a minimum counterexample, that is a map with the smallest number of regions required in order to produce a map which can't be four-colored, then you can do the following. You can remove one region from the map, four-color it, because now it's smaller than the minimum counterexample, reintroduce the region. Now let's say it was a four-sided region, and over here you've got red, over here you've got green, over here you've got yellow, and over here you've got blue. You can't colour this in without introducing a new colour. So he reasoned that if you take this green one over here, for instance, and you change it to red, and then you change all the reds that it's connected to green, and all the greens they're connected to red, and you continue around, either you reach this blue over here or you don't. If you don't, then you change this to blue, and you colour this one in the middle green, and you've just coloured your minimum counterexample. If you do make a loop around, then what you can do is leave that untouched, start at this yellow one, change it to red, change all the reds connected to it to yellow, change etc all the way up. The yellow-red line can't cross this green-blue line that goes around. So what you can do is you can safely change, they're now referred to as Kemp chains, very useful, this yellow to red and all the reds to yellow. And then you can colour the middle yellow, and once again you've got a four-coloured graph. This originally was thought to be a proof to the four-colour theorem, and it stood for nearly a decade. And then a man named Hayward came along and showed that it didn't work for five-sided regions. This was not a wasted exercise though, as it showed that the minimum region size in a counterexample must be 5 or greater. Lots of attempts at narrowing down what were required in a possible hypothetical minimum counterexample to forecoloring came after this. People started looking at minimum number of regions that would be required. There's all sorts of stuff. We're not going to go down that route, we just need Kemp chains. The next big breakthrough that we're going to be relying on came from a man called Tate. Now he showed that if you've got, let's take a five-sided region in a cubic graph, obviously. If you were to, let's say we've coloured this in, I'll actually get some colours happening here, could be useful. So let's say we've got green here and a green here. I hope that comes through. Let's say you've got a blue here and a blue here. Let's say you've got a red here and a orange, because the yellow won't show, and an orange there. Okay, so you've got a four-coloured map. What you can do is between the, let's say between the yellow and the green, we'll colour that edge green, and this is a yellow and a green edge, so we'll colour that green. You've got a red and a yellow edge, let's colour that red. You've got a blue and a yellow edge, let's colour that blue, and this one blue. But we don't stop there. We go, oh look, we've got a green and a blue edge, we'll colour that red. Green and blue is red, green and blue is red. Let's say we've got a green and a red edge, we'll colour that blue. And lastly, we've got a red and a blue edge, we'll colour that green. And you can extend this to the entire map, and what you get is every vertex will be a green, a red, and a blue. And apologies that the blue looks a little, I might need more light. Green, red, and a blue. So what you could do was, if you could show that every map could be properly three-edge coloured, as this is referred to, then you could show that every map could be four-region coloured. I imagine Tate was quite excited when he first came across this, as it was only a step away from the proof. It turned out to be an equivalent problem, didn't make it any easier. It does simplify things for looking at different aspects of the four-colour theorem, and is going to be quite useful for us. So, the next link in the chain, actually I can claim responsibility for this one. I had help from a person out there who is adamantly modest about such things, so I'm not going to mention his name, but he helped me write it up, get it published, etc. If you want to check it up, it's referred to as zonal labeling. There's books, there's papers, you can check it up, but for those that don't know it, Tate's colouring has vertices with red, green and blue. Every vertex on a map which is coloured, properly three-edge coloured, will be either red, green, blue going clockwise, or it will be red, blue, green. Red, green, blue, or red, blue, green. Depending on which of these options they are, we will number them 1 or 2. So red, green, blue going clockwise, we will label 1. Red, blue, green, we label 2. Simple enough. The trick of this being that if you label every vertex 1 or 2, such that the sum of all vertices around a region total 0 mod 3, so a multiple of 3, then the map will be properly three-edge colorable, which means that the map will be four-colorable for its regions. Again, I'm not going to go into the proof of this, the proof is out there, I'm just speeding along, bringing you up to speed. This is where we begin the four-color theorem proof. So you may be thinking that this is another equivalent problem in that this interesting maybe, but not going to offer us anything that we couldn't do previously. It does offer us one thing. We will get to that. We have some other concepts to introduce first. So first up, we are going to break every possible region in a map into 3 categories. We're going to call these based on, we're going to name these based on the size of the region mod 3. So we'll have S0, S1 and S2. Into S0 will be all the regions of size 6, 9, 12, etc. In the S1 we'll have all the regions of size 4, 7, 10, etc. And in the S2 we'll have all the regions of 5, 8, 11, etc. Okay, let's start by having a look at S0. So it could be, for instance, a 6-sided region. And let's zonally label it. So this might be a 1, this a 1, this a 1, this vertex a 2, this one a 2, this one a 2. We're going to introduce one more layer of abstraction before we dig our way back out again. Between 1s and 2s, we're going to colour those edges red. So here's a red edge, here's a red edge. And between vertices which are the same number, we're going to colour all of them blue. So blue, 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 blue. Now you might notice that there are many ways. In fact, for a 6-sided region there are 4 ways to produce 4 unique colourings for the edges that can be produced. We are going to be focusing on ones where we have 2 red edges. And we're going to refer to these as choice labellings. First of the new terms, so hopefully this is clear. If we were to up this region from a size 6 to a size 9, so still saying in S0, we could do this and we could keep the 2 red edges. That is, we could introduce, say, 3 1s, 3 vertices labelled 1 to make it a 9-sided region, and this would still be a choice colouring. It would still be an acceptable zonal labelling, but when transferred into 2 edge colouring, it only requires 2 red edges. Looking at the other, let's say S1, you can have a, make sure this is, so it could be a 4-sided region. We could label these as an example, 1, 1, 2 and 2. By doing this colouring system, we would, these 2 would be red, and these 2 would be blue, and once again we have a choice colouring which can be extended to other region sizes. So 4, 7 would be a red, a blue, a red and 4 blue, for instance, going around in a circle. This can also be done for S2s. They would be, I will cover it quickly, let's say a 5-sided region. Apologies again for my whiteboard skills. Let's say this is a 1, a 2, a 2, a 2 and a 2. This edge would be red, this edge would be red, and these 3 edges would be blue. And then you can extend this, you can introduce, it might be a red, 3 blue, a red and 3 blue going around, or it might be 2 red in a row followed by 6 blue. This can continue on. You can make a formula for this, and this is being done, whereby it's pretty straightforward really. I'm not going to go into the details because it's just going to take up time. These are, so the map itself, there'll be many regions which aren't choice colorings, they'll just be colorings. For instance, let me, on this 6th one over here, perhaps we had, let me just get rid of some of these numbers, perhaps we didn't have 111, 222, perhaps we instead had let's say a 1, a 2, a 1, a 2, a 1 and a 2. That would mean that every edge of the 6 was red in this colouring scheme. That's okay. This would be acceptable within such a colouring scheme. It's still transferable back to zonal labelling, back to Tate's proper 3-edge colouring, back to 4-region colouring. It's just not a choice labelling, which is what we're focusing on. So if you wanted to look at choice labellings in terms of just the labelling of the vertices, then you've got a set number of 2's in a row and a set number of 1's in a row. Okay, that brings you up to speed for the edge colorings, for choice labelings. There are some other things to go through. Let me just clean this whiteboard. Okay, next up I'd like to introduce valid labellings. Now this is going to touch on why, I think, zonal labelling has the potential to address the 4-colour problem, whereas things such as Tate's proper 3-edge colouring did not. Yes, it's still an equivalent problem, but we can introduce something which other abstractions of the 4-colour theorem couldn't. We can introduce degree 2 vertices. That might not seem useful off the bat, but bear with me. So let's say we've got a region which is, and we're going to add a little degree 2 vertex here. We can still zonally label this region. So we can say, you know, nice and simple, 1, 1, 1, 2, 2, 2. You can't really see that, but that's a 1 there. Okay, and this is still fine. Now, a valid zonal labelling is going to be if we can make it so that we've got here 1 degree 2 vertex. On the rest of the map, there could be anywhere between 0 and infinity more degree 2 vertices. If we can label the remaining degree 2 vertices such that the sum of all degree 2 vertices is 0 mod 3, then we're going to call this a valid zonal labelling. So if, for instance, this was the only degree 2 vertex on the map extending out past this 5-sided region, 6-sided region, I'm sorry, then this would not be a valid zonal labelling. If, however, there was one other degree 2 vertex, let's say it was over here, then we could label that one a 2, this one to be a 1, they sum to 0 mod 3, and that makes this a valid labelling. It just needs to potentially be labelled such that the sum is 0 in mod 3. It doesn't actually have to be labelled to show valid or invalid. It's just a check which you can initiate after giving a region a labelling. Check the degree 2 vertices, check the rest of the degree 2 vertices on the map. Does it work or not? Now this does mean that all cubic maps, all zonal labellings of cubic maps, each zonal labelling of a region would be a valid zonal labelling because there are no degree 2 vertices on the rest of the map. But we are extending the set of maps that we're looking at. Cubic maps are just a subset of the larger group of maps which we'll be analysing, and then we will narrow down later. Okay, so that's pretty straightforward. Valid zonal labellings, hopefully that made sense. This would in fact be a valid, now including this part, would be a valid choice labelling because when transferred into the 2-edge colouring system that I introduced earlier, there would be 2 red edges and the rest would be blue. Valid choice labelling. Hopefully that's making sense. It's only going to get a bit messier from here, so bear with me. Let me just clean that off. Okay, next up, let's talk cycle sizes. Now, normally when you're talking about the cycle size of a region, it's pretty easy. You just count the vertices or the edges, depending on which way you'd like to do it. So a normal 5-sided region has a cycle size of 5. Now we want to talk about the adjusted cycle size of regions. I don't have a better term for that yet. Maybe I'll come across one in due course. So let's take, and I'll draw this nice and big so that you can see, now let's add, say, a degree 2 vertex there. Let's add a couple here. Let's add, say, 3 here. Okay, so normally this would be a cycle size of 10. 10 vertices, 10 edges, cycle size of 10. Straightforward enough. For an adjusted cycle size, we're going to count the degree 3 vertices, as we did before, But we're also going to count the degree 2 vertices a little differently. For every one or more adjacent degree 2 vertices, so one here, one group there, one bigger group there, we just count them as one. So counting all the bits that I've circled there, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. This has an adjusted cycle size of 7. Now, hopefully that's clear. The reasoning behind it doesn't have to be as clear, but I'll give you a quick rundown. It's similar to the reason that we grouped all the S0, S1 and S2 earlier. If we were to look at, let's choose a very simple example. Let's choose a 4-sided region. Now we could give this 4-sided region a choice coloring, so we would call, say, these edges blue, and they're already red, so this would be a 1, a 1, a 2, and a 2. Now, if we introduce a pair of vertices of size 2, say here and here, we can number that one 1, that one 2, and the result is actually still a choice labeling of now a 6-sided region. We've essentially inflated the size of the region artificially by introducing pairs of degree 2 vertices. This is a very simple example. 1 or 2 can just be cancelled out. 2 degree 2 vertices, which are both labelled 1, for instance, could be replaced by a single degree 2 vertex labelled 2, and for all intents and purposes, when it comes to zonal labelling, this is going to be the same thing. What we're acknowledging by having cycle size adjustments, for lack of a better term, if you've got better terminology that you think I should stick in, please let me know. We're acknowledging that we can always simplify these things down, and while it sounds a little bit more confusing, it will help in the long run. So anyway, as long as it's clear what I'm actually doing, not necessarily why I'm doing it, but we are counting adjusted cycle sizes as the number of degree 3 vertices plus the number of clumps of adjacent degree 2 vertices. 1 or more, that counts as plus 1. Okay, gotta clean the whiteboard again, be right back. Okay, there's one more concept to cover before we can start jumping into the actual proof itself, and that has to do with connectedness. Now normally connectedness is a very straightforward concept, so if you've got a graph, can be any graph, and the connectedness, how many edges would you need to remove in order to separate at least one vertex from the other vertices of the graph? So in this one, if I were to delete, say, this edge here and this edge here, as you can see, this vertex has been completely cut off from that vertex. It was a 2-connected graph. This is, again, normally very straightforward. We are going to be dealing with graphs which have degree 3 vertices and degree 2 vertices, and we're going to have to introduce a new concept for connectedness. That is, we are going to be dealing with graphs which are, when looking at the degree 3 vertices, 3 connected, but if we were to introduce some degree 2 vertices, they only need to be 2 connected. Now, how you want to write this up, I don't know. I'm going to be referring to the graphs that I'm talking about as 3 connected, just for the sake of not introducing yet another term, which I don't want to bamboozle people. But note that in the graphs that I'm talking about, it is possible to delete an edge from here and say an edge from here, and this here vertex is cut off from the rest of the vertices. So 3 connected when looking at the degree 3 vertices, 2 connected when looking at the degree 2 vertices. This means that we will never get a situation, and this is essentially the reason that we need to do this, is let's imagine that we have a map and it goes off in that direction, and I don't know, going around, and we've got a map going off in this direction, and that's all good. We don't want it to be possible to either remove an edge and have the result be a bridge, or for there to be a bridge to start with, we remove the bridge and suddenly we're left with two separate maps. We're talking about maps where this can't happen. We've got cubic maps and a small subset of other maps which we are now about to define in our theorem. This will be the part which, if anyone has any input, I would really appreciate it. I'm going to write it out carefully and then run you through it. Okay, theorem statement time. Now I appreciate this is a little tricky to read, so I'm going to go through and read it out essentially. So first we define what a confined graph is. It is three connected with a little asterisk here, just because, as I covered earlier, what I mean by three connected is slightly different to what is normally meant by three connected. A confined graph has a maximum degree of 3. Point 1, it is not exactly 1 degree to vertex on such a map. Point 2, no region of adjusted cycle length 3. We've been through adjusted cycle length. And point 3, at most 1 region of adjusted cycle length 4. So this is confined. We're going to use that in the theorem statement, and this is a very carefully worded theorem statement and still needs a lot of work. So please bear with me. Let G be a zonal confined graph, every confined subgraph of which is zonal. Already a mouthful, but bear with me. For every region R of G with boundary cycle C and every valid choice labeling F of C, there exists a zonal labeling G of G such that G restricted to C is F. Now that is a major mouthful. It's as close to the wording that I can get mathematically speaking, but it still needs help. Now what does that mean in layman's terms? Well, let me just spin this around. So what we're essentially saying is that for a very particular set of maps, we are discarding some as we don't care about them. For instance, a cycle, just a straight cycle like that with all degree 2 vertices. That doesn't count in our maps. We've specified exactly what maps we are counting, and it is exceptionally specific, but it does need to be. But what we're saying is that in the maps that we're talking about, if they're zonally labelable to start with, that is, you can give them a valid zonal labeling, any region in that map, which falls within our boundaries, we can give a valid choice labeling to, so or colouring, as the case may be. So let's say for this 5-sided region we have a blue, 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 red, red. We can choose a valid choice labeling, and there is a zonal labeling of the greater map which will include this valid choice labeling. That is that every valid choice labeling is doable within these set maps. And so first we need to prove this theorem, and then we need to show how this theorem can be used to prove the 4-color theorem. 2 steps left to go. Every step has some substep steps and so on, of course, as is the way with these things. Okay, so there are 3 subcases to deal with. Let's take a hypothetical minimum counterexample to our theorem statement. So that would mean there is a region which we want, say, this edge and this edge to be red, and we want the others to be blue. But we can't do it because that's a counterexample. We're going to go through all the possible counterexamples and say, hey, they can't exist, essentially. Let's say, for our first case, that one of these 2 red edges that we want fall between 2 degree 3 vertices. Simple enough. So let's say it's this one here, and let's have our next region be like so. Okay, what we're going to do, remembering that this is our minimum counterexample, so any smaller map is not a counterexample, we are going to remove this edge here. Now, we are going to, that transforms this and this degree 3 vertex into degree 2. This map here, from our theorem statement, this is smaller than our hypothetical minimum counterexample, so we can give a zonal labeling to the map which produces any valid choice labeling of this region that we want. We are going to choose it so that the original edge that we wanted red remains red, and we are going to, this you can see two S2s add to make another S2. We are going to put, let's call this edge red here, and we'll colour these in blue. Great. Okay, so we have a zonal labeling which produces this on the map. We now reintroduce this edge here and colour it red. This gives this a edge colouring or zonal labeling which is acceptable. This gives this the valid choice labeling that we were after. Hey presto, no problem with the minimum counterexample. Now we can do this for every combination, so that was S2 plus S2. We can just quickly go through and say, what if we had, say, S1 plus an S2, and we wanted to give it this one as red and this one as red, and we wanted these two as blue. Then once again, we remove the edge UV, as it's known. We give this in new region a valid choice labeling or colouring. It is a 7-sided region, so it belongs to S1 as well. So that means that we go red, blue, red there, and then we can colour these blue, blue, and blue. When we introduce our edge UV back into the map and colour it red, you will notice that this produces a perfectly acceptable colouring for this region and the choice colouring that we want for this region. You only have to go through S1 plus S1, S0 plus S0, S2 plus S2, and S0 plus S1, S0 plus S2, and S1 plus S2. This is pretty straightforward. They all turn out exactly the same, as you can see from what's happening here. So we can move on to our next case. What happens if both edges we desire red in our valid choice labeling, colouring? Say we want this one is red and this one is red. They're both adjacent to two different degree 2 vertices. So that is, we want these to be blue, these to be blue, but we want this one to be red and this one to be red. What do we do then? Well, let's imagine, for the case of our example, I'm just adding, so these are 3 6-sided regions. You can play with any region size that you want, and it's not going to make a difference. The trick that we do here is, we erase both this edge and this edge, and this edge and this edge. Okay, we now colour it in, you can probably see where this is going already. We will colour in, let's say, this edge here red, and we will make that one blue, this one blue, and this one blue. And then, because this is a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10-sided region, it belongs to the S1 category, so that means that we have blue edges are 1 mod 3 length, so 1, 2, 3, 4. We then colour this guy in red. We have the rest as blue. Okay, so same logic really as our first round of examples. We've coloured it in so that this has a valid choice labelling. We now reintroduce the edges that were removed. We colour this one red, and this one red, and this one blue, and this one blue. And as you can see, this has produced, again, the valid choice labelling that we wanted, and these two have labellings or colourings depending on how you're looking at it. I find the colourings easier, by the way. This is, but they're not necessarily essential to the proof, whereas labellings are. These two are fine, and this one is what we're after. So, golden again. There's one category left to cover. You can probably guess what one it is. What happens if both the red edges are adjacent to the same degree 2 vertex? I've just jumped ahead to give some examples here. Here is an S2 connected to a S0. This is fine. We just remove this edge, colour it in as you can see there, and replace it. If you can't see, sorry, there's a blue, 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 red, and the two red down the middle. Here we've got S1 connected to an S2, so again the same 3 blue and 2 red, which is what we want on this side. And over here we've got 4 red in a row, which without those two is of course a valid choice labelling, and then the 3 blue going down there. And if you can't see it here, this is a 2 S2s connected to each other. One is a size 5, one is a size 8. Blue, blue, red, red, of course, and then we've got blue, red, blue, blue, red, blue, and the 2 red, and that's all fine. This brings us to the tricky part of things. What if, because these were the easy examples, hopefully they made sense. What if we have 2 S2s next to each other and they are both size 5? So, to draw it up nice and clearly, we've got now, with any proof like this, there's going to be edge cases. That's just the way of things. We need a way to deal with any edge cases. This is the only one I've found so far. That doesn't mean there's not more. The problem here, as you can see, is that if we delete edges from here, there is no valid zonal labelling which we can give, sorry, that'd be size 2, no valid zonal labelling which we could give which would result in being able to then reintroduce the 2 red edges. So what we do is we expand our search out further. So let's imagine that, that can be an H2, let's 1, 2, 3, 4 say, that should probably be big enough. And then, so let's say the region outside of here was like that. Then we would remove all the edges like so and make one really big region. We then introduce a valid zonal choice labelling to this big region which doesn't have any reds along the edges of the regions which we want to, which were there previously. So any edges that belong to the regions that we care about, we're not going to touch that. So let's, what have we got here? We've got a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So it belongs to S1. So let's have, say, a red here and a red over here. And then colour in the remainders blue. So this big one along the bottom is blue. I'm sorry, my text is running out of ink there. I'm going to have to start using purple instead of blue. Then we have, that one was red. We'll colour this one blue, 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 and blue. So now we've reintroduced all those other edges that we removed earlier. We colour this one red and this one red, and we colour these ones blue, blue, and blue. And you will note that what's happened is that we have I've coloured one red, which coloured the red one blue. That's what was confusing me. Okay, so as you'll notice, we now have this region, which is size 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yep, that's a 7. So it's coloured fine. The blue is length 1 and length 4, which is what you want in an S1. The two 5-sided regions, if that wasn't clear, that is the degree 2 vertex there. The two 5-sided regions are both coloured with choice labellings as well, as it turns out. We can expand the area which we're looking at until we get to a region size which allows us to have blues on the edges of the region which we care about, or regions depending on how you're doing things. And then, so if this had only been a 6-sided region, for instance, then we could expand even further out. Let's say that had actually connected over to there, and so this wasn't big enough to do the what we wanted to do. Then we would look again, and what's this region over here, and if that's not big enough still, what's this region over here, and we just keep on expanding out our search, and we get to the point where we can eventually give a choice colouring, narrow it down, produce a choice colouring that we want. Hey presto, theorem is proved. That was a lot, I appreciate, but now let's see how the theorem goes for proving the 4-colour theorem. So let me delete all the stuff off the whiteboard one last time, and I'll be right back. Okay, so just to be clear, in case it wasn't already, any zonally labelable map is 4-colorable and vice versa. This means that any hypothetical minimum counterexample to 4-coloring is also a hypothetical minimum counterexample to zonal labeling, and vice versa. We will be using this. Okay, so let's have 3 maps. Let's have M as the first map, and somewhere, this is a hypothetical minimum counterexample to 4-coloring. So somewhere in map M we have an edge UV, and this U connects to, say, W and X, and V over here connects to Y and Z. Okay, that's somewhere in map M. Let's also have map M star. Now, this is exactly the same map, except that edges U and V have been changed a little bit. So we keep vertex double, sorry, I should say vertex, not edge. So we keep W and X, and they come down, but instead we're going to put U here and V here, and I'll fix that up so that you can see the U. Sorry about that. Okay, so we've got our Y and our Z like before. So it's exactly the same map everywhere else except for this edge. Instead of connecting to W and X, U connects to W and Z, and instead of connecting to Y and Z, V connects to Y and X. Simple enough. One more map to go. We'll call this one M star star. Now this is going to be exactly the same map again, but instead of changing it around like so, we're going to connect W directly to Z, and we're going to connect X directly to Y. Take out all the edges U and V. So we're going to be using these 3 maps. Now, to start, it should be fairly obvious that M star star is 4-colorable. It has less regions, less edges, less vertices than our minimum counterexample M, so it is 4-colorable. We're going to use that to prove that M star is always four-colorable. So let's imagine that we've got a colouring for M star star. Now if it's, let's say, red here, let's in fact colour that in red, let's colour this in green, and let's colour this middle one in blue. Okay, if we had that, in theory, we could keep the entire colouring the same and apply this colouring to M. So we'd have two blues there, we would have a green, and we would have a red. Now this can't happen because this is our minimum counterexample, or at least hasn't happened yet. We're working on proving that it can. So this can't be the colouring of the here. So the only other colouring is to have the region on that side of XY be the same colouring as the region on the other side of WZ. So I've got a red, blue, red. Great. Okay, let's apply that colouring to M star. So we have red over here, we have red over here, and we have two regions which are the same colour and adjacent. We'll fix this in a second. Blue and blue. Okay, let me just delete the colouring off this one so it doesn't look like I'm relying on that. Okay, so red, blue, red, blue. Now what happens if we attempt to change the colours of these two? Kemp's chain style, if you remember from the start of the video. We'll attempt to change this red to, let's say, green. Okay, is there a red-green Kemp chain connecting that to here? Well, there has to be, because remember that these two have to stay the same, otherwise we can four-colour our minimum counterexample. So there must be a Kemp chain there of red-green. This means that our blue does not have a blue-yellow Kemp chain connecting around to both sides. So we will use Kemp chains, to change that blue to a yellow, and hey presto, M star is always four-colorable, assuming that we've started. All assumptions made, this is a hypothetical minimum counterexample. In fact, that's the only assumption. Okay, M star is four-colorable. Let's look at this from a zonal labelling perspective. So we have, so let me choose a colour which will stand out more. We have over here X, Y, U, and over here we have a Z and a W. Okay, let's give this a zonal labelling. If this were labelled hypothetically 1 and 1, so both the same label, then we could convert that labelling to the labelling of our map M, keep everything else the same. Remember that we have a zonal labelling for M star. We would then change vertex V to a label of 2, vertex U to a label of 2, and this would maintain a zonal labelling. So this region here, for instance, had a sum of 2 mod 3. It would still have a sum of 2 mod 3. This region here had a sum of 1 mod 3. It would still have a sum of 1 mod 3. We would have changed the map around back to M and kept a zonal labelling. Okay, so that mustn't be possible. So therefore these must have different labels. Vertex U, let's give a label of 1, and vertex V, let's give a label of 2. So how do we use our theorem to prove that the four-colour theorem? Well, let's choose in one of these two regions. Let's choose, say, this region here. Nice big region, whatever it might be. Let's call it a 5-sided region. Now let's give it, because it is a cubic graph that we're talking about, and we'll check how that fits in a second. Let's give it a valid choice labelling whereby this edge here is blue. So it doesn't matter which valid choice labelling we choose. Let's choose blue, 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 and let's colour this one red, and this one red. Now remember that two blues indicates the same labeling of the vertices. So we give it this, we end up with, let's say, a 1 and a 1. We can change that to a 2 and a 2 in M, and M is properly four colored. And now to check that this all works, let us go through. So you should know what M is. M is a zonally labeled map. Let me turn this around. M is a zonally labeled map. It is confined because it is 3 connected by it has to be because it's cubic, so it falls into our category without any asterisks. It has a maximum degree of 3. It does. It has not exactly 1 degree 2 vertex. In fact, it has none, so that's fine as well. No region of adjusted cycle length 3. So if you remember, our minimum counterexample had, let me flip it one more time. Thank you very much to Kemp and Haywood. Our minimum counterexample had a minimum region size of 5. That means that even if this was a, we can choose any edge for this. Let's imagine that we chose an edge where this region here was size 6. This one in here, size 6. Now, it could be bigger than 6, that's fine. We're basically saying that a map full of only size 5 regions, which you can draw relatively easily, is not a minimum counterexample to 4 coloring, I'm sorry. So let's just do that quickly. 5 sides, 5 sides. Have I done it there? 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah. Okay. So here's what a map looks like when it's only 5-sided regions. You've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. It's basically a dodecahedron but flattened. This is not a counterexample to 4 coloring. So in order for there to be a minimum counterexample to 4 coloring, it must have a region size greater than 5 somewhere. Let's say that that region is this one, just for convenience. Okay, we change the map over to here. So even if everything else was a 5, this one here would become a 4, this one here would become a 5, this one here becomes a 6 or more, this one here becomes a 6 or more. We have one region size, adjusted cycle size of 4. So, back to our checklist. Not exactly no region of adjacent cycle size length 3, adjusted cycle size length 3. We had no 3s, we had 1, 4, all the rest were 5 or plus. And at most one region of adjusted cycle size length 4. Check. Then we go through our theorem. Let G be a zonal, it was a zonal graph. Confined, check the confined. Graph, every confined subgraph of which is zonal. Now every graph smaller than what we're dealing with, M and M star, they're all smaller than the hypothetical minimum counterexample M, so they must also be zonal. That's part of the definition of the minimum counterexample. So we can tick that as well. Now, for every region R, we've chosen our region of G being the map, with boundary cycle C, that's just this site, hopefully that's obvious by now, and every valid choice labeling F of C, we've chosen a valid choice labeling whereby the edge in question is blue, that's fine. There exists a zonal labeling G of G, a zonal labeling of the map, such that G restricted to C is F, such that we produce the valid choice labeling that we want. So looking at it one last time, we give M star a valid choice labeling such that edge UV is labeled the same. This allows us to then introduce this labeling which we have to our hypothetical minimum counterexample M such that we change the labels from, say, 1 to 2, can be from 2 to 1, same thing, and we produce a zonally labeled counterexample. From this we can go back to Tate's proper 3-edge colouring. From there we can 4-colour the regions, and hey presto. Thank you for sitting through all that. I realise it was a little long-winded at points. Hopefully it was clear. If it wasn't, please let me know where it wasn't clear and I will see what I can do about it. If you've got any advice or help on the theorem statement in the middle, and this is key to the entire proof, and as you can see there are a lot of checkpoints to tick. It needs to cover quite a lot of things. If you've got any input on how to word this any more clearly, mathematician style, that would be appreciated. If you can spot a hole in my logic, again, feel free to start a discussion with me. I would love to get any sort of feedback on this. Again, I've been sitting on it for the better part of a decade. Thanks everyone for watching, and yeah, I'll see you around. Bye.